Husbands and wives that got divorced after 20 years of marriage, what made you decide to change your mind after all that time? My husband's parents did this. He said he knew his parents weren't happy for a long time. Said they went to family therapy together, but ultimately once my husband went to the army, he was the younger of two. They divorced and both later married other people. These two could not get along for anything. They hated each other. At our wedding, we had to take separate family pictures with the dad and new wife and then with the mom and my sister-in-law. It was insane. Cut to about 2 years after our wedding and I get a phone call from father-in-law's wife of 10 years. She is in hysterics. She had caught him in bed with my mother-in-law. My husband would not believe it until he talked to his father. That was over 10 years ago. My in-laws both divorced their partners and have been together ever since. My mother-in-law has all their old family pictures on display everywhere and acts like they never divorced and have been together for over 4 decades. This is a roller coaster. And that last part. Dear God. Had to watch my parents go through the paperwork to get divorced after my dad had a massive stroke and was forced to retire. It was the only way for them to keep the money from his pension and maintain his health insurance coverage. My parents got a divorce of convenience so Pops could make the mortgage payments and get his insulin. Thankfully my parents' insurance agent is a close friend and found every possible form and loophole so they could stay in the house together. It took almost 2 years to get everything settled. I'll never forget my dad's statement after it was all done. The church still says we're married, and that's what matters to us. At least now, your mother can still get her hearing aids and pay the mortgage if something happens to me. I was so disgusted with it all. I never forgave my dad's union for it, and we now make sure someone from our family shows up to their annual open meeting when they discuss the health insurance plan to shame them in explicit detail with how the board fricks over the roughnecks. Your dad must be a heck of a man. Go through with a divorce to make sure him and your mother will be taken care of. And yes, his union sucks major balls. 23 years. I had lied to her several times over the years, and she always forgave me. The last time I lied to her about accruing a severe amount of debt due to a gambling addiction. I think she might have forgiven the lie, but she couldn't forgive the addiction and the chance I start gambling again. I started attending Gamblers Anonymous after I told her, but it was too little too late for her. On the plus side, I haven't gambled in almost 3 years. My parents divorced after like 18 years due to gambling. He was a total dickhead when he was losing and I was a teenager. I was probably grounded for a year of my life or more. He hasn't gambled in 10 years now and is a freaking treat to be around. He still occasionally apologizes for being such an butthole. There's a guy in my town that everyone knows about because he owns this huge butt mansion in a middle-class neighborhood. Apparently he was married to a woman for a long time, but she left him, calling him a loser because his business hadn't taken off yet. After she left him, his business finally took off. He sells medical equipment to hospitals, and he became frick levels of rich in a few years. The reason he built the mansion in that neighborhood was because that is where she lives, so she has to drive by the mansion on her way to work every day. Our pro-revenge. My mom filed for divorce after 27 years with my dad. Us kids were out of the house and I think she had a midlife crisis, thinking that if she decided to do nothing, then that's how she'd die. In that house, doing nothing but things that make the days go by faster. I do believe an old high school flame helped her make the decision as well. At first I was hurt, but as I get older now I completely get why. My dad prefers routine over excitement and had a habit of saving us poor when we didn't need to. At first it was a financial requirement, then it became obsession. My mom wanted to travel and experience new things in her later years. She deserves that, and my dad deserves to live how he wants to too. Today I see 2 happier people, and that makes me happy. My parents got divorced after 22 years of marriage. They were never in love and didn't even like each other. They had me and then my sister a few years later and wanted to stay together for the kids. 12 years after I was born they had my brother, and that kept the cycle going. I wish I could say they are happy now, but they still like to cause trouble for each other. We're due with our first child soon and they're gonna have to figure out how to be grandparents together. Thankfully I'm 1,500 miles from them, so it won't be a headache often. I worked at a law firm that only practiced family law, divorces, child custody, wills and estates, etc. At one time we had like 8 clients getting divorced after 20 plus years of marriage, and they were all high ranking military men whose wives came out of the closet after all their kids had grown up and moved out of the house, and the guys were getting ready to retire. I thought it was so weird, but I guess for whatever reason the women thought that their duties to their husbands and families were coming to an end and they wanted to live for themselves. I guess I know why they couldn't come out 30 years ago. It was a different time, but I was curious why they were all attracted to military guys. I assume maybe cause it meant their husbands would be away for years at a time during their service. I think it depends more on how old the women were when they first married. Military people often tend to marry young and quickly. You don't know yourself when you're young. 20 years will do that to you. My parents split up after nearly 30 years. My dad was in butthole my entire life, so when they finally divorced when I was 18, there was no surprise. He'd been cheating for years and I think he was the one who finally asked for it. I think my mom stayed because she couldn't afford to start over. She spent her life putting my dad through school and wasn't educated herself. She had no family or anyone who could help her either. There was definitely some confidence issues on her part too. My husband began surreptitiously going to strip clubs. He stole about $200 a week from various accounts and a business I owned to fund these activities. He lost his job because he went there so often at lunch and would just stay. We had young kids and so I stayed after he got some therapy. He was never honest with a therapist. About a year ago I learned he was doing it again. Plus texting strippers. My youngest kid graduates high school this year. I've done what's best for everyone else for 20 years now. This September was 21 years. I don't anticipate having a 22nd anniversary. It's really scary to think of being alone. I don't hate him. I feel sorry for him. I know he will feel very sad and lonely when I'm gone. But being near him feels like having my soul ripped from my body every day. I hope you find some peace. You've been keeping it together for your family for so long. You need to live for you now. Therapy changed my mind. After more than a decade of being miserable, I finally got help. When I was able to really talk about my marriage was when I realized that I needed to get the frick out. At the end of the day, I stayed in a crappy marriage because the thought of being alone scared me. Through therapy I was clued into how many wonderfully supportive friends and family members I had if I just reached out to them. I wasn't going to be in a relationship anymore, but I wasn't alone either. Congratulations and good for you. That must have been a difficult process of realization and growth. In my experience, it's much more pleasant to be alone, if a little lost and lonely, than together with someone toxic. Not myself, but my parents. They were married for 22 years when they separated. 24 years by the time the divorce was final. From the perspective of a child in the situation, there was no way that they were happy people together. There was hardly ever a quiet moment in the house because of my father's temper, but my mother knew how to serve it back too. However, the final straw was more of a chain of events. My father had a very rigid view of the family. Man works, woman stays home, cares for the home and children. When I was in high school, my father got injured at work and needed surgery. He worked a physically demanding job and would be out for 6 months. My mother, knowing that we were already falling behind on vehicle and house payments, decided to find part-time employment. She worked while the kids were in school. It was still important to her to see her kids get on the bus and be there when they got home. My father immediately believed that she was cheating on him. He installed a tracker and tape recorder in her car. He showed up at her workplace and caused a scene multiple times. He questioned her co-workers. He spent most of time at the house drinking. This was not an equal partnership, and it really never was. You should have seen how hurt he acted when my mom finally asked for a divorce. But he rebounded real quick. All he had to do was tell some woman on Plenty of Fish his sob story, and he moved right into her house. He spent a couple of years treating her and her children horribly before she kicked him out. Only took him a couple of weeks in a hotel to find another woman to let him move in. Parents divorced after 25 years when my mom had what we thought at the time was a midlife crisis. She told my dad by draining $3K from the joint checking account to fund her divorce lawyer. 6 years later they were officially divorced since she blew through that money on different lawyers that kept firing her as a client. We later ruled out midlife crisis when her behavior started to become more odd, erratic, and paranoid. She was in her early 50s when this behavior started. Now we, myself and my sister-in-law with psychology experience, think she has late onset bipolar, and I say think since we can't get her officially diagnosed since she believes nothing is wrong with her. She lives in NY and it is super hard to commit someone there unless they are a danger to themselves or other people. She's not dangerous, just can't hold down a job and lives in her car due to her own insubordinate sporadic paranoid behavior but blames everyone else. No, she's not a narcissist, just mentally ill since she was never like this when we were growing up. She was very selfless and caring when she was younger. We were together for 20 years, married for 15. We started as high school sweethearts, but we eventually realized that we weren't the same people we were when we fell in love. We also realized that that wasn't going to change. We decided that the best way for everyone to be happy for the rest of our lives was to end it on peaceful terms before we were both 70 and resentful of each other for trapping each other in an unhappy marriage for 40 plus years. I will be one of the few that speaks from experience. I have been married 20 years, and we are on the edge. The answer is that life changes you. When you start out, the relationship is its own thing. It is cultivated and grows. Then over the years add some children and full-time jobs, and there is less time to cultivate, or none. You end up becoming life partners to run the household, and wonder why you are even together. Since there are no good times, all that is left are arguments and bad times. This is all normal, and on top of that you are both going through the personal struggles of living. To be honest, staying married is tougher than most people think in an age without divorce social stigma. The kids to keep you together, hoping somehow you can rekindle something that once existed. And this is in a situation with two good people trying to do the right thing, and not a toxic situation with abuse. Obligatory, not me, my parents. My dad filed for divorce after 25 years of marriage. My mom was shell-shocked. My dad was absolutely miserable, but the signs of a failed marriage were always present. My dad is very emotional and is quick to anger. He never really handled failure very effectively and would be mad instead of constructive. My mom very family oriented and was adamant that we never move farther than 40 miles from Chicago. Heck, when I was going away to college, she bawled to my dad to force me to go to a school closer to home. In a way, I think my dad resented my mom for never letting him travel or get away from Chicago. It also doesn't help that I'm fairly certain my mom became undiagnosed depressed once her mom died. All she would do was do her bare minimum at her job, a school bus driver, come home and sleep, finish a route for the day, cook a hamburger, help a meal for the family, and then play Angry Birds on her iPad. It's really weird seeing your parents divorce in your 20s. You're adult enough to speak candidly and neither of them likes what you have to say about them during or after the fact. The silver lining out of it is my sisters and I know how not to behave in a relationship. Your last paragraph, so true. As someone whose parents divorced when I was 22, it was good in a way because I was able to comprehend it more, but it also messed me up with trust issues and still made me feel really lost. But I was an adult, so I was just expected to deal with it. Didn't get divorced but started the process after about 25 years. Stuck it out for a few more years for the kids and ended up falling in love with her after the kids moved out. Relationships follow cycles, so glad I stuck it out. Stories like this give me hope. Would love to hear some of your tips on how you made the relationship work again. Not me, but my grandmother once told me that she was considering divorcing her husband of over 50 years. The reason she gave me was, we stayed together for the kids. Now the kids are all grown up and have lives of their own. And now I can't ignore the small things about him, my grandpa, that annoy me. She didn't go through with it, but she seemed sincere when she said it. It broke my heart, especially since I only ever saw the best side of him. Heard a story about a couple divorcing in their late 80s after 70 years of marriage. When asked why they waited with it for so long, they responded that they did not want to disappoint their children, so they did it when their children died of old age. We were together for 20 years but only married for 13 of them. Our interests just diverged over the years. I got more into music and art, wanted to go to festivals and such, and she wanted to frick her boss. I'm very grateful our attempts to have kids failed. It's much easier to make a clean break that way. That's quite the divergence. A friend of mine was married for nearly 30 years, 2 kids. As she put it, they'd been playing divorce chicken for a decade. There weren't any concrete reasons to get divorced. They didn't fight, they actually got along very well. They just weren't in love anymore. There was always a good pragmatic reason for them to stick together. They co-parented effectively. They actually liked each other. They kept saying their marriage was probably better than a lot of people's. A few years ago they just decided it was time. They went out for drinks and started hashing out how to divide their assets. They agreed on a 50-50 split. They got a lawyer to make everything legit, and a few months later they got divorced. My friend's ex-husband rented a house a few blocks away so their kids could easily walk between mom's and dad's house. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my friend's ex-husband set her up with a new boyfriend. They go on double dates. They go to parent-teacher conferences together. What a refreshingly sensible way to approach such a sensitive issue, rather than drag it along like so many others. They were able to see that they weren't happy, and even more surprisingly, they didn't hold bitterness and grudges towards each other. I wish all the people who aren't happy in their current life situation could behave so maturely and handle it in such a healthy way. She cheated for years. Plain and simple. Ended our 22-year marriage. TBH. Don't even want to work through it. Now that we've separated for a while, I realize how toxic she'd become. I'm a much better man without her. My mom left my dad on their 30th wedding anniversary. He had been in and out of rehab 3 times at that point and could not commit to quitting drinking. She couldn't stay and watch him drink himself to death anymore. My dad had multiple affairs and my mom got tired of it. There was also alcoholism and both parents were workaholics. My dad remarried a lovely woman, and so did my mom. Oh, that may have been an issue too. Must be rough when they discovered they married the same woman. Not me, but a lady I worked with. Her and her husband had been married for almost 30 years. They had 2 kids, both in their mid-late teens, and a full life together. She was the stay-at-home mom. He made the big bucks, etc. Anyways, once the kids both started to grow up and stop wanting to go to the cottage, they realized that when left alone together they didn't have much in common. Then the kids started leaving for school, and I guess things got worse. I think everything would have been fine if not for the father's dad, the grandfather, getting sick. It turns out the old man had near $4 million to his name and was giving it all to the father. So, dad consults a lawyer who says that since it's an inheritance, if he's divorced before he gets it he can keep all of it, and as such, he divorces her within days. She stopped working for us shortly after, but I know it was pretty hard on her. She got her fair shake of the currently owned assets, but couldn't touch the $4 mill. My grandparents initiated divorce proceedings a month after my dad, the youngest of his siblings, graduated college. They had stayed together to provide a stable home for their children, and once they'd all left the nest, my grandparents were ready to move on. My parents intended to separate after 20 or so years. Once my sister and I left the home, mum got sick and dad cares for her. They live almost completely separate, lives in the same house. I check in their daily BC of my own marriage having gone south and financially ruining me. I see a fair amount of these divorces get filed by older folks because one of them has dementia or the like and needs to be moved into a care facility. The couple will file for divorce in order to protect the family assets from getting completely eaten up, and Medicaid takes over the brunt of it. It is pretty sad that our healthcare state is such that it is necessary to take such a step to make sure someone gets the care that they need without destroying the other spouse's ability to care for themselves. Until the shredded safety net do us part. Before not my story, my grandparents. They met and married in the 50s. Super Catholic family. 6 kids in 9 years thereabouts. Husband worked. Wife took care of the family dynamic. It was honestly a lot of little things that my grandma eventually got tired of. First it was trying to wrangle her 3 boys, all with difficult personalities, to church, so they stopped going. Then it was things like not helping with the difficult kids, women's work, not helping with household chores. That's what kids are for, being emotionally distant. He's a man. They don't do emotional crap, etc. From the way my grandma tells it, she stuck it out so long because she thought that's what a good Catholic woman does, be long-suffering and patient. It wasn't until she started exploring outside Catholicism that she decided she'd suffered long enough. The divorce ended up being civil and mutual. Grandpa was never one for causing a scene, and both my grandparents ended up in loving, understanding second relationships. Neither remarried officially. Funny random side note: when I graduated high school in 2012, my mother invited both my grandparents to my graduation. By that time they'd been divorced for longer than they'd been married, 20 odd years together, 30 plus years divorced by my math, and didn't even recognize each other until after the ceremony. Imagine spending a huge chunk of your life with someone then not recognizing them in public years later. I'd also point out if I saw my 50 years younger self in the streets I wouldn't recognize me either. I was married to a wonderful woman for 27 years, one daughter, a perfect little family. Then I had an affair, and it broke her heart. We are still good friends, and I see her at least once a week. But I wish I could go back and undo the terrible damage I did. Now I'm 60, I live alone, and all I have left are memories and regrets. My husband had an affair around our 24th year. He broke my heart, too. We are still together now at 29 years. I'm not sure I'll ever heal from it. Everything is changed. My entire view of the world has changed. Even now, years later, I'm reeling knowing that the person I loved and trusted more than anyone else on earth could and did hurt me so badly. 28 years and I lost him to mental illness. I tried for years to get him help but he refused. He is a genuinely good person and was once an amazing husband and father. I have been divorced over 2 years and still haven't dated anyone because no one will ever compare to the man he was. Smart, romantic, thoughtful, socially conscious, hard worker, etc. That man doesn't exist anymore. I am the one who sought the divorce but expected him to want to work it out. When he said I think that's for the best I was heartbroken. He lives upstairs from me, because where would he go? I can just toss him to the streets, but it does make it harder. I feel more like a widow tbh. My parents got divorced because of my dad. We grew up in a military family. Dad was always deployed. My mom is a walking medical disaster. No offense to her. RA at 23, endometriosis at 24, got a hysterectomy and everything. They married early and had kids really early because of the endometriosis. My mom tried to cater to my dad, make sure he could still live his life in his 20s because they had kids earlier than expected. Well, being deployed all the time meant my dad could just frick around with ladies off in other places. My mom stayed home and took care of us. Dad gets a divorce when he gets back. Gets remarried like 3 months later. That lasted like 2 years before she got her green card and ditched him. My mom still loves him despite him moving on to his third marriage, having another kid, and never actually paying his portion of child support. So pretty much they got divorced so my dad could have a younger, more subservient wife. I would boo him every time he came into the room. He was a serial cheater. The straw that broke the camel's back was my then 15-year daughter having a panic attack and being hospitalized over the guilt she felt for keeping his secret. He had been having an affair with a married woman for a year and had been taking our kids with him to play house with her and her kids while her husband was out of state for work in the oil field. He was using his dying grandfather as cover by claiming to be staying overnights in the hospital with him so he wouldn't be alone and that he was taking our kids with him so they could go home with his mother and get to spend time with their grandparents on that side. He threatened our kids and guilted them into keeping it a secret until my daughter just couldn't handle it anymore. She told me. He called her a lying B and a stupid W, and when she ran to her bedroom to get away from him screaming at her, he chased her and kicked her bedroom door down to get at her for telling. I put him out of my house immediately and divorced him. Also, his entire family knew what he was doing and kept up the sleeping in the hospital with dying grandpa cover for him. He had been taking this woman and her kids to his family functions and they all welcomed them with open arms. His mother went so far as to also verbally attack my daughter when she told and called her a liar and accused her of stirring up drama for the attention. Holy cow, that's messed up. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. My parents started considering divorce right around that time, but ended up deciding against it. My dad was military and had PTSD from Afghanistan. but it didn't cause problems at home because he was stationed at a base across the state from us, so he was only home on the weekends. When he got restationed and we moved, we all lived in the same house again. His PTSD and my mom's anxiety did not play off of each other well, so they considered divorce, but decided to work through it. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.